So yeah, it's interesting that you should sort of emphasis so much on the cross and the atonement, because I know there's a lot of people today in the sort of wider evangelical movement, if you like, who would want to try and minimise that. What would you say to someone who says, well, getting into a fuss about exactly how Jesus saved us is really not very helpful for the mission. It's not very helpful for getting people in.
Yeah. Well, I think there's, some would say, and I think rightfully, that the penal substitutionary atonement is not the only picture of the atonement we see in Scripture. But I got to tell you, in my experience, all right, I would agree with that. I would agree that that's not the only picture. I get that. I don't know any serious theologian who thinks that's the only picture in Scripture. But here's what I would say is I don't hear that preached a lot. Maybe in certain circles, but I don't think we need less preaching on the penal substitutionary atonement. I think we need more. Now, do I think that we need more on the atonement as well? Yes. I think ultimately it doesn't have to be just that. We need to communicate, but it has to be that. I think Mark Dever's article in Christianity Today, I was one of the panelists for the Evangelical Press Association. I think I got to select him as the article on his article on the atonement was excellent. Now, again, so what I would say is, real simply, yes, I get that's not the only picture in Scripture. And yes, I think we ought to teach every picture in Scripture. But I don't think we need less preaching on the cross. I think we need more preaching on the cross. And the aspects of the cross that talk about how we are freed from and forgiven for sin are central and essential to that. And how Jesus did that is central and essential to that. And so, yes, I would be on very much the other side of that issue. And maybe it's my own, I now live in Southern evangelicalism, and I've never lived here before. I was born and reared in New York City, and I was reared Catholic, and then I planted in New York and Pennsylvania. But it seems to me that among contemporary churches, among traditional churches, among emerging churches, they all, not all, many of them in all different streams are still preaching the gospel of sin management. It's just different. In some churches, here are 5 ways to have a happy life, and 3 ways to raise obedient pets, and get stress out of your life. In some churches, it's don't do this, don't do that. They're preaching against this and that sin, and there's still behavior management. And in other churches, they're preaching against broken society and how we need to serve the hurting. And I think there's something. There's some things we can learn from all of those conversations, but ultimately, all of them boil down to sin management, behavior management, and I think ultimately it's not about behavior management. It's about a bloody cross and an empty tomb. And because of that, the gospel is not something I preach when I get saved. The gospel is something that saves me every day. And so I think that's the part that I think that getting to the cross-shaped life impacts everything, including the way we live today. And so again, I'd like more preaching on the cross, but maybe not the preaching that sometimes I hear. The preaching I sometimes hear is it's the cross, so you got to get saved. That's the language that used, and sometimes and it is that, but it's not just the cross and you're saved, and then you just work hard the rest of your life, so when you die, you go be with Jesus. It's the cross. I die daily. I mean this, brothers. He said, I die every day. It's the cross and the cross-shaped life that is manifest in my Christian walk, not just the beginning of my Christian walk, but my whole Christian walk.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
But you're getting me to preach now, brother, and so I didn't mean to do that. I'm gonna. It's hard for me to preach to a Mac, so I'm gonna pull back a little bit. If it was a PC, I could do it. But
yeah, no, it's good. It's good. It's good. Yeah, so I think you're right, and it's. I guess what you're saying really is that is an issue worth fighting over. I mean, there are, I guess, some issues that are not worth fighting over, but the atonement would seem like it is one that is worth fighting over from what you're saying. Pretty essential.
Yeah, I do think. I think to me, when I think of my Jude 3, contend earnestly for the faith once delivered to the saints, the atonement. I mean, I don't know how we can get there. Now, I do want to listen to voices that remind us that it's more than sin. But and I think they're okay. But if in the process of saying it's more, they don't want to talk about that, I think they're leaving a key part of the scriptural teaching on what the atonement is.
Yeah, sure. And it's a big deal over here, and I guess it's a big deal over in the US as well, isn't it, that one?
Well, it's not. I know it's a bigger deal right now in your circles because of some of the meetings that have been changed and all this sort of thing. I would say here it's a growing issue. I think if if the questioning leads to denial at a higher basis, I think it'll become a bigger deal here. To me, it's more of a fringe issue. Many people right now are just saying, well, it's more than that. All right, I get that. There are a few who are saying it's not that. But those, I would say, have left biblical orthodoxy.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, so what do you think are the real challenges facing the church at the moment then, but in the West?
Yeah, I think ultimately we're in a season of decline, and I think that's difficult. Now, of course, there are some bright spots there in Britain, and some interesting studies recently have come out to kind of talk about the church there. But here in the States, we're in a rather protracted period of struggle. If you count Eastern and Western Europe together, North America is the only continent in the world where the church is not growing, and so we're seeing some of I think the effects of secularization, of the privatization of religious expression and belief. So all these things are beginning to roost, if you will. I do see some encouraging spots. I think ultimately the church is trying to figure it out right now. I think this is why we have all these incredible diversities of the way we do church. If you ask a pastor today in the States, how do you do church? They'll say, well, we're a purpose-driven, cell-based, contemporary, seeker-sensitive, Methodist church. Or you ask another one, it's, we're a missional, incarnational community of Christ followers sent on a mission of societal transformation. It's like, they speak two different languages. Well, I think you have all these models because people are trying to figure out how can we do what God's called us to do. And so that impulse to figure that out right now, I think kind of speaks to our current situation. We're struggling. We're looking for answers. I'm about to attend the meeting of the largest Protestant denomination in America, my own denomination, Southern Baptists, on Monday, and we'll talk about how do we, as a denomination that last year declined in membership for the first time in a long time, how do we get refocused on God's mission? And so I think that's the kind of the state of North American evangelicalism. Of course, the mainliners are doing their own thing, but evangelicalism is struggling. I've been a fan, and I've kind of endorsed publicly in a few places the work of the Gospel Coalition, trying to, how do we again recenter on the gospel and what the gospel is? And there are other movements to do that as well. We had some manifestos here, we've had some statements, but I think that kind of speaks to the current situation. And we need to say, this we believe. We need to say, for this we contend. Yes, there are some things that we differ on, and there are even methodological issues are dividing churches, and there's some things we differ on, but we've got to have a common sense as we move ahead to reach a lost world, or else it'll just continue to decline following the current path, and that's certainly not encouraging.